If you're struggling to make sense of WinCC's archive management system for tag logging and alarm logging, you've clicked on the right video. I'm Bob, CEO of iQuest, and I've been working with WinCC for almost 30 years. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you how archive management works in WinCC for both alarm logging and tag logging data. I'll show you step by step how to configure your archives for tag logging and alarm logging, and show you how to keep the correct amount of data on your SCADA system and when to back it up based on your specific application requirements. I'm also going to show you how you can access and export data that has been archived for analysis and reporting. So let's get started. First, we're going to go back to Control Center, and I am going to open Configuration Studio, and we can look at both tag logging and alarm logging. And archive management is set up in the respective editor. So for alarm logging, you just right-click on Messages, go down to Archive Configuration. Now, these menu items will only be active if you're in runtime, and they allow you to link and unlink previously backed up archives. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we'll just go to Properties. And this is where we set up how much data will remain on the SCADA system for the operators to use, and when the data gets backed up and where. And you'll find that tag logging is set up exactly the same way. There is some extra configuration for the FAST database, and we'll talk about that. But under archive configuration, we have archive size and also the size of a single segment. Now, a segment just means a database. And if we go back to the project directory, there is an archive management folder in your project, and it'll be there once you have this set up and running in runtime. And in the archive management folder, you'll see a folder for each of our archive systems: alarm logging, tag logging, fast, and slow. And under alarm logging, you can see that I have 4 files, and this represents 2 databases, and these are segments. And so each segment has 2 files. One is a Microsoft data file, MDF. The other is the transaction log for that file. And notice they follow a naming convention. This Bob's Dev WinCC V8 happens to be the name of my project. And then ALG is alarm logging database. And then it's got a date time range that it covers. And so all the databases look like that. If I go into tag logging fast, you can see I have 1 segment, and it follows a similar naming convention. TLG is tag logging, F is fast, and then of course we have tag logging slow. So looking at this setup here, the time period covered by a single segment is each database file. So for this setting, I am having a database for 1 week. And then the time period of all segments, this is how much data I am keeping on the SCADA system, so that I have access to look at this data in the runtime application using the trend window or the online table control or the alarm window. And so I have this set up for 1 month. So after I've been running my process, I should have 4 segments, each 1 week long, and the entire size is going to be a month. Now, after a month has passed, we have data that is older than a month, then we might want to back that up. And so the backup configuration allows you to define a path where those data files go, and they really should be on a network path off of this machine. So if this machine gets destroyed, you can still get that data. And you have the opportunity to back up to 2 separate paths at the same time if you want. And so how do we know really what to put here? What I typically do is I ask 2 questions. The first question is, how much alarm and tag logging data do my SCADA operators need in order to do their job? And I usually just ask the SCADA operators something like, hey, how far back in time do you go look at trends if you're troubleshooting a problem or you're comparing the process to how it worked in the past? How far back do you go? And I usually get maybe a couple of months or a couple of weeks based on the type of process that this is. And then I'll ask the same question about alarms. How far back do you look at alarms? And this will usually give you a guideline. If they need to go back 2 or 3 months, then you need to leave 2 or 3 months on the SCADA. What you don't want to do is leave several years worth of data, because those are going to take up your hard drive space. Your computer is going to get slower. you're going to lose more data. So you really want to have these settings set up at the minimum amount of time where the operators can do their job comfortably, but we are regularly backing the database up off of the SCADA server so that we can retain that. So the next question is, how often do we want to back up the data? And that's going to be your single segment size. You can define it by a time period. I'm backing up once a week, or if it hits, say, a certain number of megabytes or gigabytes. And you can set this up however that you want. And if you want your segments to conform to, say, each segment is 1 week, we can set up the segment change to start at the very first week of the first month so that each segment is a calendar month and the archive size is exactly 4 calendar months. You can use your time of the segment change for that. And if we go back over to tag logging, we'll see that we have the same configuration. I'm just going to right click on archives. We have tag logging fast and slow. So I'll look at fast first. And notice it's got a separate tab. So we have the same archive configuration. And I just happen to have all the same settings, but these are 3 separate settings. So you can archive your alarms differently than you do your tag logging data and vice versa. So if we go look at our archive contents, this is a way to be able to kind of optimize your performance. And it allows you to define what you mean by tag logging fast. So by default, anything that is event-driven acquisition, meaning that the process is controlling how fast we log data, or if we have cyclic measurements, here by default it's set to less than equal a minute, but we could set that to faster data if we're logging a lot of fast data, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, what have you. And also process controlled values, meaning the PLC is changing the value of a binary tag in order to drive logging data. So anything that meets this criteria will go into the fast tag logging database. Anything else will go into the tag logging slow database. Otherwise, all of these settings are the same for tag logging fast and tag logging slow. So now that we know a little bit about how this data is stored, how can we access it in runtime? The simplest answer is we can use the trend controls. There's also an online table control to view the data, and this is going to allow the operators to view all of the data that is in their archive size. So in this case, I should be able to go back a month as long as the process has been running that long. Same thing with alarms. My long-term database should give me the last month's worth of alarms, and then everything else is backed up. Now, another way that we can quickly export data, we can export data directly from these controls. So if you go to the configuration of your alarm control or your trend control and go to the toolbar, there is an export data button. You have to enable it. It's not enabled by default. And then you can use your filters to show the data that you want. Then you can just hit your export data button and give it the names that you want. I'll just call this export alarms. And you can choose the format that you want, and we can choose whether it's comma, semicolon. We can choose our own delimiter, whether or not it's ANSI or Unicode or whatever. And here I am just going to choose to put this out on the desktop, and I'll click OK. And then on my desktop, here's my exported alarms. And that's just a very quick way to get information out of alarms or tag logging. So I'll show you very quickly. If we go over to trends, I can do the same thing. I can enable my export data. And then we can go through the same steps to export our trended data from the control. And this is just a quick way to get data out of your controls. But what if you need to go back and get a lot of the data from your archives? Well, this is a question I get a lot. How do I export data out of my archive management system into a CSV file, or use it in a SQL report for reporting services, or just into some type of query? And the answer is you're going to use the WinCC OLEDB Provider, which comes with WinCC Connectivity Pack. Now, if you just have WinCC installed, then you do have the OLEDB Provider. It is in use by WinCC, so you don't have to do anything special. If you have a remote station that does not have WinCC, but you've got WinCC installed elsewhere on the network, then there is a connectivity pack client that gives you all the interfaces you need. You can write applications that pull information from the archive management system and do your reporting and things like that. Now, in order to use the OLEDB Provider, like I'm going to do in this example, You are going to need SQL Server Management Studio, and this is a free development environment from Microsoft, and it allows you to query the contents and do database management on your SQL Server databases. Here, this is the name of my local instance. This is installed by WinCC, so it's the name of my computer, and then /WinCC. Every WinCC installation is like that. The first part of this is going to be the name of your computer, and we're just going to hit connect. The other thing that you need for what I'm about to show you is under security, under logins, you're going to need to have a local login. So I just created a password for my SA user. The OLEDB provider doesn't allow you, at least through this wizard, to use Windows Integrated Security. So you need to go in and make sure that you have a password set up for the SA user. And if you don't have SQL Server Management Studio, I will put a link in the first comment under this video. Now, I'm going to go down to the connectivity pack documentation, and we are going to first, I'll go down to access via the OLEDB provider. And this section gives you information on the OLEDB provider that allows you access, so you can just kind of read through this, gives you information on it. And then I am just going to expand this and go down to querying the archive data. And so we're using a wizard in SQL Management Studio. We don't actually have to write a script or anything, but the archive data tells you how to call using certain schema. And so for tag logging, the schema is tag R or tag XR. If you're using 16-bit data or string data, you have to use tag X. We're going to use the tag R. And if we scroll down, it gives us some examples of the way we format SQL queries to get certain information. And so this is just VB script, but here, this is what we're after, this section right here, this tag R. Tag R is telling the provider, hey, we're getting tag logging information. We can give it a list of tags up to 20, either by their numerical ID or their string name. And then we have a begin and end time. So for this particular example, notice the begin time just has all zeros and then the number 10 in the minute area. So this is year, month, day, hour, and then 10 minutes and 0. And then the end time is all zeros, which is the end of the archive. So this particular query gets the last 10 minutes worth of data. Now, if you read this documentation, you can put hard and fast dates in there as long as you've got them in the right format. There's also a time step function. There's the ability to use SQL queries to determine the exact data, but we're just going to do kind of a simple example. I can just copy this, but I'm going to have to change the name of the tag because the name of the tag in my project is different than that. But I can just copy that, and let's go over to WinCC, and the name of our archive is Color Archive, and then I'm just going to pull the blue color strength tag, which I've been logging. So we'll come back and refer to that, but going back to SQL Server Management Studio, now let's take a look under databases. WinCC is currently in runtime, so you see all the connected archives. And if you're not familiar with the database structure of WinCC, here's a quick primer. This is the project database that is running. If I look at Control Center, you can see it's WinCC_V8_SBS. That's the name of my project. And so the database names for projects always start with CC, and then the first 8 characters of the project name, and then a unique ID, which is based on date and time. And that is my configuration database for the project. So if you were to look in there, you have your tag definitions, your alarm definitions, project settings, etc. Now you'll have another database with the exact same name, but it's got an R at the end. That is your runtime database. And this, among other things, controls your archive management. And this is the database you're going to connect to in order to pull data from your different segments in alarm logging or your tag logging archives. So what we want to do, I'll just right click here, and then I'll go to tasks, and then we want to export data. And this is a wizard that SQL Server has, and we'll just hit next. And the data source, we're going to do the pull down, and this is going to be the WinCC OLEDB Provider for archives. And again, this is part of the connectivity pack, but it is installed by default with WinCC. And then we have to do properties. On the data link, we're telling it what database we want to connect to. And so we're going to connect to our bobsdev/WinCC and to our runtime database here. And so for my data source, I could put ./WinCC, which means the local machine. It's actually better to go ahead and just put in the name of the computer itself, it's actually faster. I'll put in WinCC and then use a specific username and password. Notice it doesn't allow me to do Windows NT Integrated Security, so I'm going to put in the credentials for my SA user. Uncheck blank password. By default, it's blank. If I hit test connection, it's going to give me test connection succeeded. Initial catalog is asking me what database it wants to use. If you hit this drop down, the OLEDB provider doesn't support browsing that, so it's going to tell you no. But all we really have to do is I'll just go over here and just copy the name of my runtime database and pull this back up. And then I'll just click OK. And then we can go next, and it'll ask me where you want to put the data. Now, you can put it into a database table, just drop it right in. I am going to export this directly to a flat file. So I'm going to choose flat file destination, and I'll just click browse. I'll go to the desktop, and I'll put Bob's exported tag logging data, and that'll be on the desktop. I'll click open, and then we'll hit next. And we're going to write a query to specify the data to transfer. The OLEDB provider doesn't allow you to show tables or views, and so that's not going to work. So we'll do write a query. I'll hit next. I am just going to go back to my documentation. I'm not going to get the double quotes. I'm just going to go copy that, and then I'm going to fix it for my specific project. I'm going to get rid of that double quote there. And then for our archive, it should be color archive. And then instead of tag 1, make sure you leave that backslash. It's going to be blue dot and then all caps color strength. Now, if you misspell these, it's not gonna figure out that you got the wrong name of the tag. It'll tell you that it's valid. So you have to just kind of make sure you got your case and everything here right. And then of course, our begin time is going to be 10 minutes relative to the end time, which is all zeros. I'll hit next. And then if I hit preview, there's some data, so you know that we do in fact have a valid SQL query there. And you can see we have quite a bit of data. But now all I really have to do is go to next, and then I can run this and hit finish, and it'll export my data. And I'll just hit close, and we can go to our desktop. And here's the data that we have. And so one thing I want you to notice is currently you can't see my clock on the computer, but it's 11:54. And this data is for, if we go down to the very last recorded data, it is 15:52:59. So my computer clock is actually 4 hours behind that. The reason is, and this is really important, WinCC always records data using UTC time, or Universal Coordinated Time. And so if you are querying this from a script inside WinCC and you're querying for certain timestamps, you're going to have to correct for UTC when you query the data. So what I would have to do, instead of 11:52, I would have to put 15:52 as my end time if I was using hard-coded dates for my begin time and end time. So if you are querying this data and you're putting in real dates and times to go get a chunk of data, make sure you convert that to Universal Coordinated Time or Greenwich Meridian Time first. The next really important piece of information you're going to get out of this video is, if you recall, we queried for blue dot color strength. So why is this 3 here? And what that is the archive tag ID. The problem is, I'll go all the way back up to the top. The problem is you don't really know where this comes from. If you come into your color archives and I look at the properties of my blue dot color strength, nowhere on this property section will you see the tag value ID. And as far as I can tell, it is not in here. You might look at this 1 here and think that that's it, but I can reverse this and now it's a 5. So this number here does not matter. If we were to, here, let me reverse that again so that I don't confuse anyone. So if I highlight this, I'll kind of minimize this detail pane. You can look at all these values and there is no 3. So you have the ability to actually look at multiple tags up to 20 in one query. So how do you know what number goes with which tag? And to answer this, we're going to go back to SQL Server Studio. Earlier earlier in the video, I said that this is our project database. It does not have an R at the end, so this has my configuration information. And the way you find that out is we expand this, and you're going to come down to the tables, and there's one called PDE tags. All of your PDE tables are your tag logging tables. And if I just right click and do select top 1000 rows, you can see this is a list of my archive tags, and there is a column, and its name is tag log tag ID. And so we can write a SQL query from this table if we just kind of get rid of this stuff. And if you've taken my database programming course, then you'll recognize a little bit of what we're doing. If you hadn't, maybe you should kind of check that out. What we want to do is select, we'll do tag log tag ID, and we also want to do the var name. And so I'll just put var name here with a comma, and here this gives us results of what the actual var name is and what the tag log tag ID is. And you could actually use this in place of your archive name and tag name in your query, and it's actually faster because it doesn't have to parse the string. So this is the way that you tell what your tag logging tag ID is for your archive tags. Now, going back to the documentation on the connectivity pack, they do give you some example Visual Basic script code. It's not complete, but they kind of get you started. So you can write scripts to do exactly what we did in SQL Server Management Studio. So here I've written a script. I've used basically the same command text. I only did 3 minutes, and I'm just printing out the data. And if we go into runtime, then I can execute this script and basically get the same data into a record set, and I'm just kind of printing it out. I will be adding some modules to my Udemy course, Database Programming for WinCC Engineers, that goes further in depth in using the WinCC OLEDB Provider. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link to the course in the comments. Okay, that's all I have for you today. If you made it this far, I appreciate you watching my video. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel and consider being a member to get additional benefits. Also, check out my database for WinCC Engineers course on Udemy. I'll put a link in the comments, and thanks for watching.